Thank you for downloading this podcast from the BBC. In this edition of File on 4, Alan Ury investigates Britain's witness protection system.
We feel like we live in a nightmare. We're trapped, isolated. We haven't been allowed to work. We haven't been able to function properly. So everything that we had is now gone.
Tonight, a rare insight into the plight of people living in hiding in fear for their lives.
I had to give up my life in order to stay alive. It's not enough to just keep people alive. You have to support them to make a new life that has meaning for them.
Some we've interviewed are speaking publicly about their experiences for the first time. They say they've chosen to do so because they're being badly treated by a system responsible for their safety.
One word that was used once by a police officer was, "The world is your oyster. You can do what you want, you haven't got any problems in the world, everyone will be taken care of." Well, it's not, is it? So they lied to me. They lied to me.
So, how much help should people get when they're asked to do their civic duty and give evidence against Britain's most dangerous criminals?
There came a point where I think he realised that the bank were going to foreclose or pull the business in. Obviously, we had many millions of pounds tied up of our own funds, and he reacted in a way where he approached me and was planning to, in his words, kidnap the bank manager or the senior bank official so that that person could maybe change their mind on funding.
It was 2007. The economy was crashing, the banks were calling in loans, and life was about to get desperate for Steve, then a successful businessman. We've disguised his identity along with all the other witnesses taking part in this programme. Steve's business partner had seemed fine when the going was good, but now he wanted his investment back, and he didn't care who got hurt in the process. His plan to kidnap a bank manager quickly turned into threats against Steve.
He started intimidation tactics. He started on both my partners and my family, blowing up cars, blowing up houses, using firearms to shoot through windows in houses. A masked man turned up at the house, was on the driveway pouring petrol all over my car. I went out of the bedroom window and told him to stop. He pointed the gun up and told me to get back in or I was going to be killed.
Steve has children. A friend of one of them was attacked by 4 men and badly cut up with a knife. Police increased security.
They had police presence 24 hours a day, armed, outside my property. We were not allowed to move, or we were not allowed our children to go to school. It was not safe. The police said they have intelligence in that we will be killed. They turned up in a riot van, escorted us to the police station, then handed us over to these covert officers who effectively done some type of exit strategy, like an MI5 drill on radio walkie-talkies, just to get us out of that local community, and then we were away.
That itself must have been quite scary.
It's like a movie.
They were taken away from the area and put in safe, temporary accommodation. Then they were stripped of their past life.
They took all our belongings off us, bank cards, phones, anything to do with our identification. They told us to stay there, stay indoors, and they would be back over the next 24 hours. We just couldn't communicate with any of our family and friends, and they were obviously left wondering what the hell was going on as well. They moved us round to 29 different places all across the country. And all the time we kept saying, what the hell's going on? We just want to go back home.
Your children have gone with you at this stage, haven't they? So how are they coping with that?
The children were obviously very emotional, and they were asking many questions which unfortunately we didn't have the answers for.
Eventually it was decided they were in so much danger they needed to become protected persons, a term which has legal status and places on police a duty to ensure their safety. But relationships with their police handlers began to deteriorate. Steve says they asked the family to sign an agreement which he said would define the terms for the new life they were to be living. This is known as a Memorandum of Understanding, which sets rules aimed at keeping victims and officers safe. It's standard practice in witness protection cases. But according to Steve, the terms were unacceptable.
We were being asked to sign it without being able to seek legal advice. And they kept on saying, well, until you sign that, we can't move the case on, we can't move this case on.
What was it in that document that you were unhappy with then?
We were having to sign to say that we go from a certain status to state benefits, that we would live in a property that was substantially different, that we couldn't have access to certain family and friends, that we had to go through them to do anything and everything. And it's just, at the time, we were asked to sign it in the back of a caravan whilst we were packing the car to move to another destination. So they knew what they were doing. They play on you to make you to sign it, to just hurry up and sign it.
The dispute rumbled on, with the family refusing to sign. But it's a requirement of joining a scheme. If they didn't sign, they couldn't be properly protected, and the consequences of that were stark.
When we met the chief of this covert unit, they all pulled a trick and said they got social services involved, and they told us that if we didn't sign, we would have our children took off us instantly and put into care. They said that the children would be at risk and that's something that they couldn't be left exposed. And our argument was we're not happy with the agreement.
Do you not think they have a point about the safety of your children? If you can't go into a witness protection scheme and they can't apply all the full measures that they are able to apply, then your kids might be at risk.
I agree, but obviously you can't go into or comply with the scheme if their own agreement, what they're asking you to sign about yourself, is wrong. You know, it's common sense, you know, that the risk is obviously there, but the current system is undoubtedly flawed.
Confronted with that choice, Steve says he reluctantly signed the memorandum, but argues he was pressurised into doing so. Police were unwilling to discuss the details of his case with us, so we only have Steve's version of events. Fiona Murphy is a solicitor who specialises in legal action against the police. She's acted on behalf of other protected people unhappy about the way they've been treated. She believes the balance of power between the two sides is unequal.
One of the many reasons why protected persons are in a uniquely vulnerable position is that they are not permitted copies of their memoranda of understanding. They're not entitled or able to seek legal advice with regard to the content of those memoranda, and it means that they are entering into agreement about matters that will affect their lives for the rest of their lives. They don't have the opportunity to agree terms that will give them an opportunity to hold the officers to account to them for any breach of that agreement.
What's the justification from keeping these memoranda away from victims and witnesses?
There has to be a clear demarcation between those aspects of the memoranda which relate to policing methods and in respect of which there would be every reason to protect the confidentiality of that information and indeed the confidentiality of the protected person's circumstances. But I fail to see how anyone is served by a lack of openness and transparency as to the terms of the engagement between the protected person and the police. And therein lies the difficulty in terms of accessing justice, because the officers will have records and the individual in a very vulnerable circumstance is unlikely to have records. We receive really quite a significant number of telephone calls from protected persons seeking legal advice. They tell pitiful tales of lives absolutely destroyed. It's not always the case that we can help, and it's certainly our impression that there's a great number of aggrieved individuals out there who are without access to legal advice and are deeply aggrieved with regard to the circumstances in which they find themselves.
How many isn't known. According to the Association of Chief Police Officers, there are about 650 cases of protection in the UK, involving 1,400 people. Assistant Chief Constable Andy Cook, who leads for ACPO on witness protection, argues complaints are few, but he accepts independent scrutiny is lacking.
I would be quite amenable to having a outside system of reviewing individual cases to ensure they were fair. Now, whether that was done by judiciary or others, I think that's a fair question to pose. It doesn't happen at the moment. And it's certainly something that we're happy to keep considering, because it would at least give individuals on the scheme a feeling that someone outside the police had an opportunity to see if we had dealt with them fairly.
Do you recognise at the moment that's a shortfall then, is it?
In my personal view, the system would benefit from it, yes.
How many complaints do you actually get? How many complaints make it across your desk?
Very, very few. As I said, over 600 cases. Vast majority of people are happy with the standard of service that they get. Bearing in mind these people are in life-threatening situations, and the police are caring for them and looking after them in the best possible way that we can. So very, very few complaints come through.
That's little consolation to Steve and his family. He told us he's lost his business and his house, which was burned down when empty by arsonists after the family had been rescued. He says they're living on much reduced means, getting handouts from the police. And the family has also had to deal with the trauma of the threats.
If somebody's walking behind you, you're thinking, is this somebody, watching me, following me, looking over? You're listening for accents and voices. You're watching people closely.
What's been your frame of mind throughout all this?
At times I've really reached certain low points where I've almost thought, well, maybe taking my life would be the most productive and sensible option, in the sense that if I was dead, then maybe this person or these people who are after me maybe would leave the rest of the family alone. I've come very close to it. The only reason I haven't done it is for my children.
Not surprisingly, the police service won't reveal operational details of how they put a witness protection programme together. But Detective Chief Inspector Jerry McBride, who for several years has dealt with cases as head of Scotland's witness protection system, says they try to offer a tailor-made service.
We need to make sure that we don't generalise, that we'll think of each case individually and almost have that kind of bespoke support that considers where they want to go. But there is also a lot of work that requires spending significant time with protected persons and their families, making sure they're comfortable with the cover story or the life history that we're asking them to adopt to help support their protection. And that's an important part of it, and that's down to the skills and gifts of the officers who are involved in that. And they do that very well. And they have to make sure that, first and foremost, it's sustainable, that it's credible, that the people who are being asked to undertake it have the ability to remember it, and that they have some feedback and almost training themselves from the officers who are involved to make sure that if there are difficult questions that get asked at time, people are curious. When people turn up in new areas, it's natural for us to ask questions. So they have to make sure that they're comfortable with that and they can answer those appropriately.
But even for those who've been in it a long time, it's still not easy. No one's supposed to know where they live, so some we've interviewed agreed to come into BBC buildings. But others were reluctant even to do that, so we had to meet them at a neutral location of their choosing, far removed from their new life.
I've travelled to meet with a woman who's been in witness protection now for almost a decade. She was formerly a professional person, and because she's been in the system for so long, and because she has professional skills, it gives her quite an insight into the sorts of difficulties that she has to face almost daily.
I've heard it described as social death. I don't want to think that it's accurate. I believe in trying to be optimistic, trying to have hope for the future, but it's certainly very difficult.
Shona was a victim of serious crime in the late 1990s. She was attacked by a man who persistently stalked her for years after she met him during the course of her work. Unlike some in witness protection who've been associated with criminal activity, she has no criminal background.
I think we're a different group of people who are probably less well equipped to deal with witness protection because we're not necessarily very good liars, apart from anything else. People with histories of criminality are often very good liars, and therefore I think fitting into the things you have to do probably comes more easily.
Just to be clear about this, you've got to lie about your past life, haven't you?
Well, one tries not to lie, one tries to omit things as much as possible, but sometimes the only way around things is to lie.
Your identity's been changed, hasn't it? You've done that. Can you cope without now any of the protection services? Can you actually live a life without anybody's help?
No, because I need help whenever I go to do anything that requires a verifiable history. And I will need that for the rest of my life.
What sort of thing?
The obvious examples are around education, volunteering, employment. I can't operate independently, which is very difficult for somebody who has been a competent adult.
Shona didn't want to give any details about her personal situation, but she says she needs more support from the police, upon whom she still relies.
Does being in witness protection feel like you are being cared for?
Most of the time, no. Occasionally, yes. I've been fortunate in that I've had some really kind handlers at times. But most of the time, no. Most of the time, it feels like being warehoused.
Looking back on that crucial decision you took to decide to join a scheme, if you knew then what you know now, what would your decision have been?
I think in my particular circumstances it would probably have been the same, because I had had to give up my life anyway in order to stay alive. I think perhaps what I should have done at a much earlier point is emigrate.
That's a pretty extreme step, though, isn't it?
With witness protection as it is at the moment, I think for some people it might be a much better option. I mean, inevitably, going onto a witness protection scheme means that you lose your life as you know it. That's inevitable. But I think the impact that that has could and should be mitigated, and it just isn't adequately mitigated at the moment. It's not enough to just keep people alive. You have to support them to make a new life that has meaning for them.
For ACPO, Assistant Chief Constable Andy Cook concedes there's a case for more understanding about people's needs, as well as taking care of their safety.
I think we are focused on security. I mean, the staff involved in this are police officers and police staff. We're not social workers. We are excellent at the security aspects, and we learn all the time about the welfare issues that go with it, about supporting individuals. We do an awful lot now to make sure that that support is standardised. We have one national training course to ensure that all people involved in protecting people have the same access to knowledge and skills. So we work hard to ensure that every client who's involved in this scheme gets as good a service as possible.
For people who are not criminals and for whom the criminal justice system is a strange place for them to be, they feel pretty bruised. They feel it's a pretty brutal human relationship, really, sometimes. Well, why does it have to be that way?
It doesn't have to be that way, and I think sometimes the perception that it is might be misplaced. Sometimes, don't get me wrong, it might be the reality. I think what's really important are the individuals involved in this side of business understand the levels of stress and confusion that's going on for those individuals who come onto a scheme like this. We're working hard to ensure that is the case. But it is a stressful situation. There's no two ways about that. Our staff do their best to understand the situation, but they've never been through it themselves. But we do as much as we can, I believe, to make that as easy as possible.
The importance of getting the balance right between security and support is crucial to the credibility of the service. Matthew Ryder QC, a criminal defence lawyer with expertise in this area, says what's needed is a clear set of national guidelines and standards, something which is missing so far.
What's not ideal is if each police force is making up their own rules or reaching their own agreements in an ad hoc way. It's much more useful if there's a consistent framework that everybody can follow. And so it's very dependent on the nature of the agreement that's made between the person and the police in question or the handlers in question. And there can be real inconsistency as to what's provided. Sometimes the documentation is very poor. Sometimes it's almost done entirely orally. And so that sort of informal approach, which sits on top of the statutory framework, can cause serious problems. And people sometimes find themselves in situations where they think they've reached agreements, either orally or subsequent to a framework, and only to find out in due course that what they thought was in place isn't in place.
Police want more witnesses coming forward to give evidence in court. Matthew Ryder has been part of a discussion about improving anonymity for trial witnesses, making submissions to the government on behalf of the Bar Council. If the courts handle it properly, it's likely that fewer will need full protection afterwards.
Modern policing depends on human sources. It's supposed to be intelligence-led policing. It requires the police to get information from people. Sometimes they're informants, sometimes they're witnesses. And people providing information need to know that their information will be kept secure and that their identities and the information that they provide will be confidential. Now, in order to do that, people have to have a really clear understanding on the terms on which they're giving information, how the police are likely to use it, and when, if ever, details of who they are and what they're providing would ever be disclosed.
And that's been a problem. Last month, the BBC revealed how a 16-year-old witness had to go into protection because his details were revealed to gang members on trial as part of the disclosure process. Usually, defence teams are entitled to see all relevant information held by the prosecution in advance, but that wasn't supposed to happen in his case. The teenager was awarded a payout of £600,000, but he'll be in hiding for many years. Now, File on 4's discovered another case in which it appears the same mistake has happened.
I imagine this is a very different sort of place to where you actually come from, where we are now.
There's no tower blocks, there's no alleyways. In the area I've come from, you always had to be alert that there may be someone behind you. Or
life's still not much of a walk in the park for this young South Londoner, who we're calling Sarah. Like the others in this programme, we've disguised her voice. She took the brave step of helping police investigate gang members she knew in her area, suspected of murdering her close friend.
My friend and his friends, they robbed a cannabis room. He was chased through the streets and beaten and then executed point blank to his head shot.
Word was out on the street about the people behind the killing. Sarah asked that her helping the police be kept a secret. She'd be despised and in danger if it got out.
From the area we come from, just to speak to the police, for whatever reason, you are known as a grass, and it's actually probably worse than having a paedophile as a next door neighbour. It's really frowned upon, but at the same time I wanted to do the right thing and I wanted to help my friend's family to get justice for their only child who had just been murdered.
At that point, did you think you'd be at risk if it was found out that you were talking to the police?
Every single communication we had, I would tell them, this cannot come out, this cannot come from me, and I would be assured and reassured that this was strictly just to help the police with their investigations.
So you were assured of anonymity about the intelligence that you were passing over as an unofficial informant?
Yes.
You're sure about that, are you? There's no room for misunderstanding it?
No, 110%.
But with suspects arrested and a trial approaching, Sarah found out her cover was blown.
About 2 weeks before the trial date, I received a phone call from a friend who asked if I'd been speaking to the police, if I'd been feeding them intelligence information regarding my mate's murder and the people involved. They said they'd been offered £3,000 to effectively stop me from going to court.
What do you think they meant by that?
I didn't think I was going to be killed, but I thought definitely that I was in danger in my house, my family was in danger in the house, maybe the windows were going to be put through, the door kicked off. I was going to be made to be terrified to go to court to give my evidence.
Badly shaken, she was left wondering how word had got out. The next day, she was called to an urgent meeting at a police station, where she found out. Officers revealed her information had been disclosed to defence teams in error. She asked to see exactly what had been handed over.
The papers were brought to the interview room, and I can only explain it as if someone from that area saw it, they would just see it as a grass list. I was then asked again, did I want to go home? And I said, no, I don't. I'm really scared now. This is really bad.
You were naming suspects, weren't you, in your intelligence?
Yeah, suspects, and also the people above the suspects as well, and people that weren't actually behind bars, that were out, that knew where I lived, that I bumped into regularly. I mean, everyone I did speak about and everyone in those papers did relate to the case in some way or another, but I was actually petrified, and definitely for the safety of my family at that point.
The criminal justice system had fouled up. Her lawyer, Simon McKay, is still trying to piece together exactly what went wrong with the handling of intelligence material that was supposed to have been kept secret by the Metropolitan Police.
It was initially disclosed by the police officers in the case and then handed over to the defendants by the Crown Prosecution Service's representative in court.
But she insists the agreement was she'd be anonymous, so do you know exactly what went wrong there?
I think the real reason why a problem arose in that case was that she was effectively acting as a covert human intelligence source, as an informer for the police, and she had been assured confidentiality, but because she hadn't been properly authorised or regulated as a human source, again, she fell between the cracks. Normally, if you are a registered informant or covert human intelligence source, the paperwork is different. It's a different colour during the course of a disclosure exercise, so that the...
You mean it's an actual different colour?
It really is a different colour, so that there can be no dispute, so that an alarm goes off in the mind of the prosecutor that there is highly sensitive material. In this case, because she wasn't authorised, there was no distinguishing marks on the paperwork, and the material was eventually, and very tragically for her and her family, handed over to the defendants.
By mishandling the case, the state had put her life and the life of her family at risk. She did give evidence in the trial. 2 men were convicted and jailed. There were other suspects, but insufficient evidence to put them before the courts, and now they knew she'd been helping the investigation.
The police said that the actual only option, really, was to go into full witness protection. The biggest thing which I just didn't think I could actually physically cope with was total lack of communication with my family. I would actually have rather be dead than never speak to my family again.
So she decided not to enter the scheme. Instead, she moved away from the area and changed her name. Sarah is planning to issue legal proceedings against the Metropolitan Police because of the seriousness of the disclosure mistake. No one from the Met would be interviewed or give a statement for this programme. Although Sarah was able to choose not to go into witness protection because it's voluntary, there are others against whom the threat is so serious they don't have the luxury of turning it down.
I heard footsteps coming up the stairs, so I turned round on the chair to see who it was. 2 big blokes came through the door in black, balaclavas on, hoods on, asked me my name. I said yeah, and they just pulled a gun out from underneath the tracksuit bottoms and stuck it in my mouth.
This man, we've called him Chris, ran a successful business in the northwest of England, in partnership with someone he regarded as a friend. But it turned out his friend owed a lot of money to a criminal gang, and they wanted it back any way they could get it. So they came looking for Chris.
They said, "You owe us money." They wanted £100,000, which I didn't know why they wanted £100,000, because I had no dealings with these people whatsoever. They smashed my teeth with a gun. The 2 of them beat me. I put my hand up to stop them, and every time I put my hand up to stop them, the beating got worse.
Where were they hitting you?
Oh, everywhere. Everywhere. They were hitting me over there with the gun. It split my head, split my lips, knocked my teeth out, and I just had bruises all over me.
Further threats followed. He went to the police for protection. He made a statement and agreed to be a witness. But that only made the gang more determined. They began to target friends and family in a terror campaign. Police moved Chris and his wife into hiding while they investigated. Officers decided it would be too risky for them to go back to their old life, and that, just like everybody else who's faced it, they found hard.
I was placed in the witness protection programme, and my life just ceased to exist from then onwards, really. For the first 12 months, you'd have probably put me in a straitjacket. I couldn't walk down the road with anyone behind me. I would literally turn round and go in the opposite direction for an hour. People don't realise what an effect mentally this has on you.
What's life like now, then, for you and your wife?
Horrible. Horrible. We haven't got one. We just barely exist.
Describe to me a typical day, then. What do you do in a typical day?
Nothing. Nothing. I do nothing.
But you must be able to go out and do something. You've moved to another part of the country. You're relatively safe where you are.
Get up, go for a walk, keep myself active, go for a run, stuff like that. But apart from that, We don't do anything. We don't go down a restaurant for a meal. We don't go to the pub for a drink because we haven't got any money to do that.
And that's at the heart of his complaint. Chris argues he's been left much worse off financially. Police policy is to try to create an equivalent lifestyle as best they can. And Chris says, based on assurances he was given in the run-up to the trial, that's what he thought would happen.
Every time I asked them a question regarding me businesses or me home or anything like that, every single answer they turned around and said to me was exactly the same all the time. Don't worry, everything will be taken care of.
You know what they meant by everything will be taken care of?
No, they would never go into it. They just kept on saying to me, don't worry, everything will be taken care of. Just keep your head straight for the trial and we'll discuss it further after the trial.
But he claims everything wasn't taken care of. Chris lost his business and his home. He says he couldn't work because he was in hiding, so he couldn't keep up the mortgage repayments on either. And he couldn't explain to the banks why without breaking cover. Chris told us he and his wife are now living in rental accommodation, which they regard as substandard, but which the authorities pay for. He says the couple have to make do on £100 a week allowance from police. He claims his income used to be around £150,000 a year. Because he believes he's been sold short, he's instructed a solicitor, Simon McKay.
He says that the police promised him sufficient resources to begin to rebuild his life, including some stake money so that he could begin to rebuild his business. His business was valuable. He had built it up over a number of years and it was very successful. What he wasn't doing was saying to the police, I require like for like. All he was saying was that I want something to enable me to begin again, and he didn't get it.
Should he have got it then?
In my view, yes, he should have done. But of course, the police in that case are being very difficult. They're not even disclosing the risk assessments that they've carried out in relation to this individual. We can get no disclosure from them, and again we're having to take it to a court of law in order to begin to get him some kind of redress. Morally, there shouldn't have been any question about it.
The police force in question wouldn't be interviewed for this programme and would make no comment. There's no available information which gives spending on individual cases, but the Association of Chief Police Officers says the average cost is £30,000 per case. It doesn't sound a lot, but some will be more costly than others to maintain. And Assistant Chief Constable Andy Cook points out there are further limits to what they'll provide.
I think what we try to do nationally in protecting people is to ensure that we can attempt to replicate the same standard of life people have had previously, but that will never be exactly the same. They will never be able to feel as they've felt before because of the risks and stress that sit on them as a result of this change in their lives. And we, as a police service, have got to understand that. And we've got to make sure that we can do all we can to make this transition as simple as possible. At times, people have lifestyles that aren't supported by reality, so they live in debt. It's not for the police or public money to pay those debts for them at the end of the day. What we look to do is replicate their current level of earnings, their current level of lifestyle. But if that lifestyle is built upon a fallacy, then we certainly wouldn't replicate that.
But when you have businessmen, quite wealthy businessmen, who are saying, at least to us, we're not expecting to go back to the lifestyle that we had, but we do want some money to set up a new business. We do expect to have a better level of accommodation that we've been put in. We don't expect to be living on the equivalent of welfare because we're not here through any of our fault. And what do you say to those people?
I agree they shouldn't be asked to live on a level of welfare if they've had a different life previously. What we can't be seen to be doing is to incentivise people who come onto the scheme, because that would subvert the whole prosecution process and the criminal justice process. We do numerous checks in relation to current financial viability of individuals. We look at what they have in their own banks, we look at what the debts are, and then we try to achieve a balance in relation to what would be fair to replicate for them.
It's clear Chris has suffered a lot of trauma because of the attack on him and the threats to his life. This could have affected his view about any subsequent deals struck with police. The whole experience has certainly left him feeling disillusioned.
They've missold me. They told me everything would be okay. Had they sat me down when I first gave the statement and said, listen, you continue down this road, you're going to have to enter the witness protection programme. Once you enter the witness protection programme, your life as you know it will be finished. Your house will go, your businesses will go, everything that you live right now will go. They don't tell you anything like that. One word that was used once by a police officer was, the world is your oyster. You can do what you want, you haven't got any problems in the world, everyone will be taken care of. Well, it's not, is it? So they lied to me. They lied to me.
Is that what's really eating away at you now?
Yeah, the police have lied in order for me to give evidence. They don't care about me. They care about getting a conviction.
The police service has recognised some of its shortcomings in protecting people. ACPO is proposing a new nationwide system run by a single organisation, the National Crime Agency, which comes into being next year. That recommendation is contained in a review of current arrangements, now with the Home Office, the Ministry of Justice and Chief Officers. But it's yet to be agreed. For Assistant Chief Constable Andy Cook, it's vital police get their protection service right. Have some people had a raw deal out of this system?
I think it would be fair to say that not everybody's expectations have been met once they've come onto the system. The whole point of witness protection and protecting people is to ensure that people come forward to help us in our inquiries in some very, very serious cases. The police will ensure that you remain safe, and that's the most important issue here. The safety of individuals and making sure that those people who should be brought to justice do so. I do think the system's underused, and I think if we can make the system more attractive, I think more people will be happier to come forward in the circumstances, knowing firstly that we can protect them, and secondly that they won't get a raw deal.
Thank you for downloading this edition of File on 4. The reporter was Alan Ury, and the programme was produced by Paul Grant. File on 4 will return with a new series in June. In the meantime, for more details on our podcasts, please go to the Radio 4 website.